Hey everyone, it's Scrat here from a Squirrel Plays, and yes, I am still a little under the weather, but it doesn't matter because today we're going to be talking about that custom D&D race that I've mentioned more than a few times, and that race is the Fungoli, or Fungoli. Really doesn't matter, it's however you want to pronounce it. It's totally up to you. If you're just here to grab the goods, there is a link in the description down below. That will get you the PDF for this race, and it contains all the information you will need to use it. In this video, we will be going over that exact same PDF, hopefully answering any questions you might have, as well as throwing in a few pieces of advice as one GM to another. And for your convenience, I will break this video down into segments as follows. Part 1 will be the introduction, which we are currently at. Part 2, why this race was made and what it was made for. Part 3, the rules. Part 4, HyperEvolutions. And Part 5, closing out. And now that you know what's in store, let's move on to part 2, which is why in the world did we make this race? What were we thinking? Well, despite being an aquatic creature, Gleeful Kraken really likes mushrooms and she wanted to play as one in D&D. Simple as that. She had a creative spark one day and got to work. At the same time, I had also been cooking up a way to add a respawn mechanic that would let you keep your character, but at the same time involve recreating it to some extent. Now, the reason I wanted that to be a thing is because I greatly appreciate it when players put a lot of thought and effort into their character. I like it when they give their characters a unique personality, a decent backstory, and just generally put some nice thought into it instead of making the best well-rounded character they can stat-wise that will always make the best decisions that benefit them the most. When somebody makes a decent character that is believable, the last thing I want to do is kill that character and take it away from the player. That just encourages them to make that boring, overpowered character that makes all the right in-game decisions. So the solution was you can die, but should the body be recovered and brought to a certain place, you can come back, but you come back with different stats. And we'll cover all that coming up, but that's the history and reasoning behind the concept. Also, for those of you that don't already know, we are using this race in our current campaign. There are 5 players and every one of them is playing as a Fungoli. Considering how close they came to wiping in the last session, I think it's safe to say that the race is not overpowered. Good job, Glee.
Yee.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the meat of the meal, the juice, the acorns of the tree, or dare I say, the mushrooms of the field. Yes, it's time to look at the rules and how this thing actually works. Now, keep in mind, this race was designed with level 10 being the cap, and if you would like to follow along, we'll start on page 1, as that tends to be a good place to start these kinds of things. And right there at the top, you will find a lovely picture that we could not find the original artist for, so if you are the one that drew that and you are watching this video, blame Glee, not me. But also, hit me up with a link so I can properly give credit. Also at the top, you will find the flavor text introducing this race, and it reads as follows.
There are many things that are hidden deep below decomposing undergrowth. The Fungoli are an exceptionally resilient and diverse species of mushroom-based humanoids. They're native to the Underdark but are widespread within it. Each colony displays unique characteristics due to an adaptive response to where they specifically grow. No 2 colonies are ever quite exactly alike in appearance or mannerisms.
Now, the Fungoli were imagined to be a very curious people, which works out considering how sturdy they are. They are able to thrive in nearly any condition imaginable, but this does lead to them looking incredibly different across the different colonies. As stated in the examples, some might be charred due to nearby volcanic activity, others might display bright toxic colors because they live in poisonous regions or play too much League of Legends. Perhaps you have a Fungoli in mind that spends their time in the frozen north, giving them an exterior that is solid white to help them blend in and made with thicker fibers to keep itself warm. Use your imagination, that's what it's there for. Now let's get down to the numbers and stats. Your ability scores are as follows. -2 in Constitution. A mushroom might be able to grow just about anywhere, but it might not be the strongest thing against a direct attack. Also, while playing as a Fungoli, it is assumed you are leaving your home, meaning you are now outside of your element. Thus, -2 in Constitution. You will, however, receive a +1 to your Wisdom because Fungoli are extremely old. Being able to regrow after one's death means time has little effect on you. You will also receive the boon of +1 to a stat of your choice. Diversity is what makes the Fungoli strong, after all. As mentioned before, a Fungoli's regrowth ability allows them to live well beyond the years of even the oldest of mortals. The youngsters are referred to as Fungolings until they reach their first century. At that point, most don't bother to keep track of time, so your Fungoli's exact age will likely be unknown to them. And you thought my memory was bad. Fungoli do not stand in any particular alignment and encourage trying different things. For size, a typical Fungoli can be anywhere between 4 to 7 feet, as well as 75 to 250 pounds. In-game, their size is medium. Fungoli have a movement speed of 25 feet, and they can only dash on natural surfaces. This can be surfaces such as dirt, shallow water, and raw wood, but what is considered natural is up to your GM. A Fungoli's movement is also not restricted by difficult terrain so long as it is still natural. If you find yourself on unnatural terrain, such as polished stone, you will be unable to dash. Again, what is considered natural and unnatural is up to your GM. As a Fungoli, you will also have dark vision because, let's face it, would it even be a D&D race if it didn't have dark vision? You do, however, also have sunlight sensitivity. Being natives to the Underdark, you find that direct sunlight is a wee bit of a problem. You are limited to 30 feet of vision in this case, and you have disadvantage on ranged attacks post 30 feet. Enemies shooting at you from farther than 30 feet will have advantage against you. For skills, you will gain proficiency in 2 of the following: Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, or Survival. And bringing up the rear is languages, which you get to read, write, and speak Undercommon, as well as 1 other language of your choice. Take note that the Fungoli do not have mouths, but instead emit sounds from their chests. That means magic that requires verbal components can still be cast. And now for the fun stuff, the racial abilities. Your first ability is Fibrous Resistance. This means you get advantage on saving throws against poison, as well as resistance against poison damage. Pretty simple stuff. The next ability is Natural Healing, and this is where the game starts changing. Due to their mushroom-like nature, Fungoli are able to regenerate and heal their wounds at a much more rapid rate than others. Because of this, you are now allowed to use your hit dice whenever you wish to do so. You do not require a short rest in order to use them, as it takes a Fungoli only a few seconds to recover. However, if you are attempting to use a hit die during combat, you must sacrifice all of your movement for that turn, as well as your action and your bonus action. The good news is that at level 6, you can use up to 2 hit dice at the same time. Your next ability is Rooted Resting. Fungoli require natural ground in order to benefit from a long rest. They must also remain completely undisturbed for a full 8 hours while rooted. Rooted Resting will grant you full HP, full spell slots, and it will also completely refill your hit dice. If your Rooted Resting is interrupted, you will only regain a partial amount of resources at the GM's discretion. And this is where I'd like to leave you a small note from one GM to another. Do not try to come up with a table that covers all of your bases. If you try to make a blanket rule for covering your long rest, you'll be doing your players a disservice. Instead, make a plan for your party's current level, and when they outgrow that plan, you make a new one. And if you're not sure how to distribute partial resources from a disturbed rest, here are some options. Instead of a full health refill, say the party only restores up to the 50% mark of their max HP. That means if their max HP was 20 and they had 11 HP when they started the rest, they wouldn't get any HP back. If they were at 2 HP, then they would be at 10 HP after the rest got disturbed. Another idea is if you're at a lower level, such as 2 or 3, give random amounts of hit dice back to each player. The tank of the group might get 2 whole hit dice and no health restoration, while everyone else either just gets 1 dice or maybe even nothing. For the spellcasters, you can give them random spell slots back. Somebody might get 2 level 1 spell slots back, while another gets just a single level 3 spell slot. Roll some dice to shake this up if you want to. The point is, the rest was disturbed. That means there's a chance it might not be very beneficial. But another important thing to remember is that depending on what disturbed them, they might be burning some more resources as soon as they wake up. So don't be too harsh on them. And with that out of the way, we'll move on to the next ability, which is the Regrowth. And this is the respawn mechanic I was telling you about earlier that I wanted to make. The first thing you need to know is that death saving throws are not a thing that you get to do as a Fungoli. When you hit 0 HP, you are on the ground and considered dead. However, if you have a hit die that you can use and somebody else has a means of healing, be it a spell or a potion, then they can bring you back. You will consume both the hit die and the healing source used, and your HP will be filled for what each of those things roll. Now, if you have no hit dice left, or if whatever killed you left half or less of your body behind, then what remains can be found must be brought back to an area blessed by Lamat's waters. Lamat is the Fungoli's deity, and there's also a document full of wonderful flavor and text and lore down in the description below. If you're wondering what area would be blessed in such a way, it would most likely be wherever your party's base of operations is. Wherever you decide that is, it can be there and only there. You cannot move the waters. Once returned to the waters, your Fungoli will regrow after 24 hours. You will return with fully restored HP, you will be at the same level, and any and all gear that you are able to recover is still yours. But you must re-roll your stats and redistribute, your ability score increases. Also, re-rolling your stats is not like rolling stats for a new character. It's a little bit riskier. When you initially create your character, inform your GM of your limit preference. You can have a 420 limit or a 618 limit. This limit is permanent and cannot be changed after session 0. With a 420 limit, the lowest number you can roll for a stat is 4. And the highest you can roll is a 20. With a 618 limit, the lowest you can get is a 6, and the highest you can get is 18. And for how you roll, you start with one stat, you roll a d20, then you assign that roll to that stat. Rinse and repeat until done. That means you would start with strength, then roll a single d20, and whatever that lands on within the limits you chose, that's your new value for your strength. So if you had a 618 limit and rolled a 3, then that stat would be 6. On the other hand, if you rolled a 20, it would unfortunately be brought down to 18. Another fun benefit of regrowing is that depending on where and how you died, your Fungoli will grow back with a random mutation. These mutations are up to the GM, and by mutation I mean either an entirely new ability or just a passive stat boost. You can only have one mutation at a time, and if you die and regrow again, that mutation is lost and replaced with a new one. And if you're wanting some examples of what you can do with mutations, here's a couple examples of what we've done so far. Our barbarian died in a nice lush forest, so for his mutation I gave him the ability to raise thorns all over his body. These spikes deal damage to anyone hitting him with melee strike, and they consume a resource that we haven't talked about yet. In just our last session, our ranger died in the middle of an important character development step while fighting some undead. Because of the undead, as well as the character trying to overcome his own fear of death, he had a few mutations to choose from that were all based off a life and death kind of theme. He ended up choosing an ability called Give and Take that allows him to give hit dice to other players as well as take them for himself. Other things to consider might be a +1 to AC due to growing back with thickened fibers, or maybe lighter fibers and now you have a little extra movement speed. Don't be afraid to make abilities that also come with a side effect. Not everything has to be a straight positive. Also, I have a note over here in the document for GMs. Technically, it's about long rests, but it applies to everything. Basically, it's just saying that you as the GM should not be afraid to change things, whether it's this custom race or 5e itself. You're the one doing the legwork to make this game happen, so if you think something needs tweaked for the sake of balance, by all means do it. For example, when we started this campaign, I said tiny hut is not an option because I knew that would cause a lot of problems. Now, I mentioned this in another video, but every table is unique, so you got to do what works for you at your own table. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. Now, another thing I did to help me balance the table was I had each player write me a roadmap for their character with the skills and spells they planned on getting all the way to level 10. I know some people might think that's just a little bit crazy and asking way too much of the players, but let's be real for just 1 second here. If the GM has to spend their time planning for every single session, I think the players can be arsed to plan one time during the whole campaign. The reason for it, though, was so I could look ahead at all the skills and see what may or may not be a problem. This also prevented any major disappointment on the player's end. If there was a spell they had in mind that they didn't get until level 8, but were looking forward to it for months on end, Well, how upset would they have been when I turned it down once they finally got there? By planning out their character ahead of time, I could pre-approve everything so there's no surprises. Now, does that mean it's written in stone? Well, no, of course not. They can make changes as the game goes on, should they so desire. I don't expect anybody to know exactly what they're going to do from beginning to end, but they also know whatever they change their mind on, it might not be approved. Another added benefit of this is that it does help newer players get a better grasp of their character. I won't say who that new player is at the table, but they're purple and they live in the ocean.
Hit me.
Anyway, my point is, do what works for your table. My rules and mods or 5e's own rules might not work for your table the same way they work for mine. Everybody is different, just make sure that your group is on the same page as you. And that, ladies and gents, brings us to leveled abilities. Fungoli get a wonderful ability called Spores. As an action, you can expel spores all around you for various effects. Fungoli are immune to one another's spores, so no friendly fire to worry about there. Each spore ability will consume 1 spore, and at level 1 you have a total of 3 spores while gaining 1 spore for each level. Do take note of the quick reference guide on the last page. At level 5, you add an extra 5 feet to the range of all spore abilities. And those spore abilities include the following. Vicious Spores, all creatures within 5 feet that fail a wisdom save become completely focused on the caster for 1 minute. Rapport Spores, all creatures within 5 feet that fail a charisma save are pacified and become neutral for 1 minute or until they take damage. Paralyzing Spores, all creatures within 5 feet that fail a dexterity save will become stunned and fall prone for 1 turn. Hallucinogenic Spores, all creatures within 10 feet that fail an intelligence save will hallucinate and become disoriented for 1 minute. They roll with disadvantage for the duration. And with the spores out of the way, that takes us into the last thing that I wanted to give its own category, and that is HyperEvolutions. And just what in the crusted acorn is a HyperEvolution? HyperEvolutions were Glee's attempt to push the players into developing their characters a bit more. It was a way for them to put some extra thought into what makes their characters unique and special. Originally, she had no intention for HyperEvolutions to be particularly useful outside of roleplay. But I suggested that you at least give them a little something, else our players will most likely ignore the entire concept altogether. So honestly, HyperEvolutions are something you could give any character in your game and not just Fungoli. But what exactly is a HyperEvolution and how does it work? Well, it's whatever you want it to be that you can convince the GM to allow in your game. Me and some of the players in our current campaign have come up with completely unique abilities, and some we've taken from what's already in the game and broken it down into pieces. Ideally, your HyperEvolution will be something unique to your character that only makes sense for your character to use. Your HyperEvolution can follow one of 2 paths. You can start with one at level 1, and then it will upgrade at levels 4 and 8. Typically, if you're starting your character with one, either it won't do much at all at level 1, or if it does have some use, then it won't get much of an upgrade at level 4. On the other hand, if you're not entirely sure what your character would get, or you'd like for them to discover something along their journey, then you can get something at level 4 that will benefit you and have it upgraded at level 8. I'll give you the current examples we have in our party, except I have to be careful here because some of them are still secrets and I know they're watching my videos, so hopefully I don't spoil anything. We'll start with Glee's character, Ko. Ko is an arcane trickster and a bit of a troublemaker. He's young, adventurous, and doesn't make good decisions and is usually in over his head. Also, Ko only has 1 arm. His HyperEvolution is what he uses for his second arm. Ko started with his HE at level 1, and it's a modified version of Mage Hand. So long as the Mage Hand is attached to his body, he can get an extra 5 feet of reach with his one-handed weapon, which is pretty good. However, the Mage Hand is always attached to Ko's body, and Glee had to give up the Mage Hand spell she normally would have learned at level 3. At level 4, when her HyperEvolution grows, she'll get what is essentially the Mage Hand spell she would have gotten at level 3. So by getting that little extra something at the start, she actually gets held back until her HE finishes growing at level 8. Our ranger, Ashalon, is using their pet turtle as their HE. Ashalon now has an extra action type they can use in combat called Animal Action, and their turtle companion has some abilities they can use. Similar to Ko, Ashalon sacrificed some abilities he normally would have gotten at level 3, but it will pay off at level 8 when his HE evolves. I won't spoil anything, but his turtle friend will have some pretty neat abilities it can do. Our Wild Magic Barbarian, Candleflame, got a modified Wild Magic table that grows in options as his HE grows. Some effects are harmful, some are quite silly, and some are extremely useful. Again, no spoilers here, but that's the gist of it. It also may or may not include a badger. Our Battlemaster Gurk also has a unique choice. He can take his mushroom cap shoulder pads and toss them like saw blades. At level 1, all this has done is replace his ranged weapon that was normally a bow. All the stats are the same, but the flavor is that he's pulling off razor sharp mushroom caps and tossing them. At later levels, he'll get some special effects with these. So while he started with an HE at level 1, it actually changed nothing and will eventually grow into something more, such as being able to ricochet and hit multiple enemies at once or curve around corners. That's the ideal hyper-evolution. And as for Pepper, well, hers is a bit more complicated. She's playing as a custom class called the Soulbinder, and her HE is heavily based off of that, so unless I explain the entire class, her HE isn't going to make much sense, and that's not what this video is about. But it is extremely unique to her character. And speaking of videos, this one is over. That's right, if you watch the entire thing, then that means you're a certified professional Fungoli player. Also, in spirit of keeping the tradition that's been going on for one whole video, this video shout out goes to Megaspinosaurus Rex. His comment actually came at the perfect time. I was sitting around asking myself what exactly I was doing with my channel. I felt like I had forgotten and lost track and my content had become too scattered, and I began to wonder if I had veered off course. And then I thought, what is the course? I kid you not, I decided to fire up my channel and take a look at the comments, and there he was right at the top. Mr. Dino Man said he couldn't count how many times he had tried to join a fandom online because he didn't always follow the current popular opinion. Because of this, he was glad to see I was reaching out to people like him. So there you go, a squirrel forgot what he was doing and a dinosaur reminded him. Who'd have thunk? Anyway, getting back to the Fungoli, all links should be in the description below. If you enjoy this race and think it's fun, please be sure to direct your gratitude towards Gleeful Kraken, and you can do so by giving me large sums of money. And as always, please share your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you think it's terrible? Are mushrooms stupid? Or is it the best idea you've ever heard in your entire life? Comment down below.